The wedding contract landed on Emily Carter's kitchen table at exactly 8 o'clock a.m. It wasn't wrapped in romance. It wasn't accompanied by flowers. There was no engagement ring, no heartfelt proposal, and certainly no promise of forever. Just a thick folder, a black fountain pen, and one sentence typed across the first page. 1 year of marriage. $50 million. No love required. Emily stared at the papers while the kettle screamed behind her. At 24, she had imagined her wedding would begin with laughter, family, and hope. Instead, it began with overdue hospital bills spread across the same table. Her mother's chemotherapy payments, her younger brother Noah's university tuition, the notice threatening to take away the tiny house her late father had spent 20 years paying for. Every bill whispered the same cruel message. You have no choice. A black luxury sedan waited outside. Inside sat Daniel Ashford, 40 years old, CEO of Ashford Global Holdings, a billionaire known across New York for saving dying companies and destroying anyone who betrayed him. The media called him cold. Employees called him impossible. Investors called him a genius. Emily knew him only as the stranger offering to buy a year of her life. Daniel never looked at people longer than necessary. Meetings lasted minutes. Conversations ended with numbers. Feelings complicated business. Business created weakness. Weakness cost billions. That philosophy had built one of America's largest companies. But today, as Emily stepped into the car wearing an old blue coat she had owned since college, something felt different. She wasn't glamorous. She wore no designer labels, no expensive perfume, only tired eyes hiding months of sleepless nights. She looked at him once, before quietly fastening her seatbelt. "So," she whispered, "where are we going?" Daniel answered without emotion. "To my lawyer." She nodded. No complaints, no questions. That surprised him. Most people talked endlessly around billionaires. Emily simply watched the city pass through the window. The lawyer explained every clause. Separate bedrooms, no public affection unless required, attend business events together, protect each other's public image, never discuss private arrangements. After 12 months, they would divorce. Emily would receive $50 million. She read every page. Finally, she asked only one question. "If I sign this, my family keeps their home?" Daniel looked directly at her. "Immediately. And my mother's treatment? I've already paid the hospital." Emily's eyes widened. "You already?" "I don't make offers I can't fulfill." For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then, she signed. News exploded across America. Billionaire CEO marries unknown young woman. Social media exploded. Gold digger, opportunist, attention seeker. Every headline painted Emily as another woman chasing wealth. Nobody knew she hadn't bought a single new dress. Nobody knew she still rode the subway whenever cameras weren't watching. Nobody knew every dollar Daniel transferred went directly toward medical expenses. She kept nothing for herself. The Ashford mansion felt more like a museum than a home. White marble floors, massive glass walls, silence echoing through every hallway. More than 20 staff members worked there, yet nobody smiled. Dinner arrived precisely at 7. Everyone disappeared afterward. Daniel usually spent nights inside his office overlooking Manhattan. Emily wandered through endless hallways, feeling completely alone. One evening, she noticed an elderly housekeeper struggling to carry several heavy laundry baskets upstairs. Emily hurried over. "Please, let me help." The woman smiled nervously. "Mrs. Ashford, you don't have to. I know." Emily lifted 2 baskets anyway. "My mom always says kindness is lighter when shared." The woman laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh heard inside the mansion in months. Within weeks, everything began changing. Emily learned every employee's name. She remembered birthdays. She thanked gardeners. She asked chefs about their families. She brought coffee to security guards working overnight. Tiny gestures. Nothing expensive. Yet somehow, the mansion slowly transformed. People smiled again. Employees chatted during breaks. Fresh flowers appeared around the house because gardeners wanted her to see them. Even the cooks experimented with new recipes simply because Emily complimented their meals. Daniel noticed. He simply didn't understand it. One afternoon, he asked his assistant, "Did we hire new management?" "No, sir." "Then why is everyone happier?" His assistant hesitated. "It's Mrs. Ashford." Daniel frowned. "What about her?" "She treats everyone like they matter." He returned to his paperwork, but those words refused to leave his mind. Emily never asked Daniel for jewelry, never requested vacations, never demanded shopping trips. Instead, she often disappeared on Saturday mornings. Curious, Daniel instructed his driver to follow her, but from a distance. The luxury car stopped several blocks away from an old community center. Emily stepped out carrying grocery bags. Inside, families lined up quietly. Children laughed despite wearing worn-out clothes. Emily spent hours serving meals, playing with kids, listening to elderly people who simply wanted someone to talk to. She never mentioned being married to one of America's richest CEOs. To them, she was just Emily, a volunteer. Daniel watched through the window, confused. She could have spent the afternoon buying diamonds. Instead, she washed dishes beside strangers. For the first time in years, a business problem couldn't explain what he was seeing. That evening, they ate dinner in silence. Finally, Daniel asked, "Why?" Emily looked up. "Why what?" "You spend your free time helping people." She shrugged gently. "My dad used to say, if someone leaves your presence feeling less alone, you've already made the world better." Daniel looked away. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. His own father had taught different lessons. Trust no one. Feel nothing. Win everything. Emily believed the opposite, yet somehow, she seemed happier than people who owned everything. Days later, Daniel arrived home unusually early. Rain poured outside. As he entered the foyer, he heard music. Soft piano notes echoed through the mansion. He followed the sound. Emily sat beside the old piano with several staff members gathered nearby. One chef quietly sang. The gardeners clapped. Housekeepers laughed. For one brief moment, the mansion felt like a family home. Nobody noticed Daniel standing in the doorway. He should have interrupted. Instead, he stood there listening, smiling, without realizing it, until his assistant whispered behind him, "Sir." Daniel's smile disappeared instantly. Everyone froze. The room became silent. Emily stood. "I'm sorry. Were we too loud?" Daniel looked around. Employees expected punishment. Instead, he calmly loosened his tie. "No." A long pause. "Continue." The staff stared in disbelief. Daniel turned and walked upstairs before anyone noticed, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the Ashford mansion no longer felt empty, and Daniel Ashford, America's most emotionally distant billionaire, had just taken the first step toward falling in love with the woman he had married only as part of a business deal. Daniel Ashford had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. He had faced hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, and financial crises that brought seasoned executives to tears. Yet every morning, he found himself pausing outside the dining room for one unexpected reason: Emily. She always greeted everyone the same way. "Good morning." Not because she had to, because she genuinely meant it. The security guards smiled when she passed. The gardeners waved. Even the chef, known for speaking only when necessary, started preparing breakfast with excitement because Mrs. Ashford never forgot to compliment his cooking. Daniel couldn't understand it. She possessed no authority over them, no power, no title beyond being his wife. Yet people followed her kindness more willingly than they had ever followed his orders. One rainy Tuesday, Daniel entered the dining room expecting another quiet breakfast. Instead, he found Emily carefully wrapping homemade sandwiches in parchment paper. There were dozens of them. He frowned. "Are we expecting guests?" Emily looked up and smiled. "No." "Then who are those for?" She tied the final ribbon around one of the packages. The construction workers rebuilding the elementary school down the street. Daniel blinked. You know them? I know they're working in the rain. She stood, picked up 2 large baskets, and headed toward the front door. They deserve a warm lunch. Daniel watched her leave. For several moments, he remained standing in complete silence. His assistant entered carrying the day's schedule. Sir, the board meeting begins in 40 minutes. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he looked through the window. Emily was already outside, holding an umbrella over the baskets instead of herself. She walked through the pouring rain until she disappeared beyond the front gate. Across town, the boardroom was filled with the country's most influential investors. Quarterly profits had exceeded every expectation. The company was about to announce its biggest international expansion. Executives waited for Daniel's presentation. Instead, he found himself staring at a single sentence written on the first page of his notes: growth through people. He suddenly remembered something Emily had said days earlier. If people feel appreciated, they'll always give more than you expect. At the time, he had dismissed it as optimism. Now, he wasn't so sure. Without warning, Daniel closed the presentation folder. I've changed today's agenda. The executives exchanged confused glances. We're discussing employee well-being first. The room fell silent. One director laughed nervously. Sir, is this a joke? Daniel looked directly at him. Does it sound like? Within an hour, Ashford Global approved higher education scholarships for employees' children. Expanded maternity leave, mental health counseling, emergency family assistance funds. The finance department protested the costs. Daniel approved everything anyway. For the first time in company history, profit wasn't the first priority. People were. News spread quickly throughout the company. Employees couldn't believe it. Some cried. Others called their families. Several longtime workers said it was the greatest change they'd seen in decades. Nobody knew the real reason. Daniel never mentioned Emily. That evening, Emily noticed something different. You look tired. Daniel removed his jacket. Long meeting? Successful? He hesitated. I think so. She poured him a cup of tea. Not expensive imported tea, just simple chamomile. My mom says tea helps when people carry too much. Daniel accepted the cup. Nobody had ever handed him tea without expecting something in return. No business proposal, no favor, no negotiation, just kindness. It felt unfamiliar. Days later, Emily visited the hospital to see her mother. The chemotherapy was finally working. Color had begun returning to her face. Doctors were optimistic. As Emily walked through the children's cancer wing, she noticed a little girl crying alone in the hallway. Her stuffed rabbit had lost one of its ears. Emily sat beside her. What happened? The little girl sniffled. Bunny got sick. Emily smiled gently. Then let's fix Bunny together. She borrowed a small sewing kit from one of the nurses. 20 minutes later, the rabbit looked almost new. The child hugged Emily tightly. You fixed him. Emily laughed. No, she touched the girl's forehead. You were brave enough to wait. From the opposite end of the hallway, Daniel watched quietly. He hadn't planned to come. He had simply wanted to check on Emily's mother. Instead, he witnessed something that made his chest tighten. The child didn't care that Emily lived in a mansion. Didn't care about wealth. She cared because someone sat beside her when everyone else walked past. Daniel couldn't explain why his eyes refused to leave Emily. That night, he couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., he wandered downstairs. The lights in the library were still on. Emily sat curled up on the sofa reading an old novel. She looked surprised. I thought you were asleep. So did I. She smiled. Bad day? Daniel considered answering with his usual response. I'm fine. Instead, he told the truth. I don't remember the last time I couldn't solve a problem. Emily closed her book. Maybe it isn't a problem. What is it then? She thought for a moment. Maybe your heart is learning something your mind doesn't understand yet. Daniel looked at her. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way. Not with pity, not with fear, just honesty. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, something Daniel had almost forgotten existed. The following weekend, Emily convinced Daniel to accompany her to the community center. He resisted at first.
I don't belong there. You belong wherever people need help.
Reluctantly, he agreed. The moment they arrived, dozens of children rushed toward Emily. Miss Emily! She laughed as tiny arms wrapped around her. One little boy stopped in front of Daniel. Are you her husband? Daniel nodded awkwardly. The boy looked disappointed. You don't smile much. Emily covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Daniel cleared his throat. I suppose I don't. The little boy reached into his pocket. He pulled out a tiny sticker shaped like a smiling sun. My teacher says smiling is contagious. Before Daniel could react, the child placed the sticker on his suit jacket. There, now you'll remember. Everyone nearby burst into laughter. Daniel looked at the bright yellow sticker on his expensive tailored suit. Normally, he would have removed it immediately. Instead, he left it there. For the rest of the afternoon, the employees at the community center noticed. Emily noticed, too. She didn't say anything. But the smile on her face said everything. For the first time in years, Daniel laughed. Not because of a business victory. Not because of success. Because a child believed even billionaires deserved a reason to smile. And as the sun began to set over the city, Daniel realized something that terrified him more than any financial risk he had ever taken. The marriage contract still had 10 months remaining. But somewhere between shared breakfasts, quiet conversations, and simple acts of kindness, his heart had already forgotten it was supposed to be temporary. The first rumor reached Emily before breakfast. She hadn't even finished pouring orange juice when two maids suddenly stopped talking. As she entered the kitchen, their smiles disappeared. One quietly lowered her head. The other hurried away. Emily frowned. Did I interrupt something? No, Mrs. Ashford, one of them replied quickly. Everything is fine. But it wasn't. As Emily walked through the mansion, people greeted her politely, yet something felt different. The warmth was still there, the ease wasn't. She didn't understand why. Meanwhile, inside Ashford Global's headquarters, Daniel was facing a problem unlike any business challenge. His mother, Victoria Ashford, elegant, powerful, and determined to control every part of the Ashford family legacy. She entered Daniel's office without knocking. I've given your marriage enough time. Daniel didn't look up from the documents on his desk. What does that mean? It means people are talking. They always do. Victoria crossed her arms. You married a woman with no social standing. Daniel finally looked at her. I married my wife. You married a contract. Her words hung heavily in the room. Victoria placed a glossy magazine on his desk. The cover showed Emily serving food at the community center. The headline read, Billionaire's wife spends time with homeless instead of high society. Victoria shook her head. She's embarrassing this family. Daniel calmly closed the magazine. I disagree. You've changed. No, I've become aware. She stared at him. She's manipulating you. Daniel's voice remained calm. No. Then explain why you're defending her. For the first time, Daniel didn't have an answer. That afternoon, Victoria visited the Ashford mansion. Emily welcomed her warmly. It's nice to see you. Victoria forced a polite smile. I'd like to speak privately. They sat in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. For a long moment, Victoria admired the flowers. They're beautiful. Emily smiled. The gardeners planted new roses last month. I'm not talking about the flowers. Emily's smile faded. Victoria placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a check, $20 million. Emily stared at it in disbelief. What is this? A fresh start? I don't understand. Victoria leaned forward. Leave Daniel. Emily slowly closed the envelope. I signed a contract. You can break it. I gave my word. Victoria's expression hardened. Don't pretend this isn't about money. Emily looked directly into her eyes. If it were. She gently pushed the check back across the table. I would have taken that. Silence filled the room. Victoria had expected anger, negotiation, excitement. Instead, Emily stood. I'll make you some tea. As she walked toward the kitchen, Victoria remained frozen. $20 million, rejected without hesitation. For the first time, doubt entered her mind. Maybe this young woman wasn't after the Ashford fortune after all. That evening, Daniel noticed Emily unusually quiet. You've barely spoken. She smiled softly. Just thinking. About what? She looked out the window. Do you ever wonder if people see who we are, or only what they think we are? Daniel immediately understood. My mother visited. Emily nodded. She loves you. She loves the family name. Emily didn't argue. Instead, she asked, are those different things? Daniel didn't answer, because he honestly didn't know. Days later, Ashford Global hosted its annual charity gala. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Politicians, celebrities, billionaires. Everyone wanted to be seen. Emily wore a simple navy blue gown, elegant but modest. She refused the diamond necklace the stylist recommended. This is enough, she said. When Daniel saw her walking down the staircase, time seemed to pause. She wasn't the loudest person in the room. She wasn't dressed in the most expensive designer gown. Yet somehow, everyone noticed her. Not because she demanded attention, because she carried kindness with quiet confidence. Daniel found himself unable to look away. During dinner, a famous socialite approached Emily. With a bright smile that barely hid her contempt, she asked loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. So tell us, what was it like, going from an ordinary girl to living in a billionaire's mansion? The surrounding tables became silent. People waited for Emily's answer. She gently placed her fork down. It was strange, the woman smirked. I can imagine. Emily smiled. I realized something. What's that? A larger house doesn't automatically become a warmer home. The ballroom fell silent. Daniel looked at her. So I decided to make it one. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked her. Instead, several guests quietly lowered their eyes, because deep down, they understood exactly what she meant. As the evening continued, Daniel stepped outside onto the terrace for fresh air. The city lights stretched endlessly before him. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. She loves you. Daniel turned. It was Samuel Brooks, his oldest friend. They had known each other since college. Daniel sighed. You noticed. Everyone noticed. Samuel smiled. The only person who hasn't admitted it is you. Daniel leaned against the railing. This marriage ends in 10 months. Samuel shrugged. According to paper. Daniel remained silent. Samuel looked toward the ballroom, where Emily was laughing with one of the catering staff after helping clean up a spilled tray. You know what impresses me? What? She treats the waiter exactly the same way she treats you. Daniel followed his friend's gaze. Emily thanked the young waiter as though he had done her a great favor. The waiter smiled with relief. Samuel laughed softly. Money buys service. He looked at Daniel. Respect has to be earned. Later that night, the gala finally ended. As Daniel and Emily walked toward the limousine, paparazzi surrounded them. C.O. Ashford, Mrs. Ashford. Look this way. Flash after flash lit up the street. Suddenly, an elderly photographer lost his balance and fell hard onto the pavement. His expensive camera crashed beside him. Most people kept taking pictures. Some security guards moved to push him aside. Without thinking, Emily broke away from the crowd. She knelt beside the old man. Are you hurt? He nodded weakly. My ankle. She removed her own evening shawl and folded it beneath his head. Daniel immediately stepped beside her. Call an ambulance. One security guard hesitated. The press is watching, sir. Daniel looked at him sharply. Exactly. He took off his own suit jacket and covered the injured photographer, protecting him from the flashing cameras and the cold night air. For nearly 20 minutes, neither Daniel nor Emily left his side. The photographers stopped taking pictures. Instead, they lowered their cameras, watching the city's most powerful businessman kneeling on the sidewalk beside a man no one else had noticed. When the ambulance finally arrived, the elderly photographer grabbed Daniel's hand. "I've spent 30 years taking pictures of powerful people." Tears filled his eyes. "You two are the first who stopped seeing a photographer and saw a person." Daniel didn't know what to say, because deep inside, he realized the truth. Months ago, he probably would have walked past without stopping. Now, he couldn't imagine doing that. And standing beside Emily under the flashing lights, Daniel finally understood that the greatest investment he had ever made wasn't in a company. It was in the woman who had quietly taught him how to see people again. The photograph was everywhere by sunrise. Not the glamorous red carpet pictures, not the expensive limousine, not Emily's elegant dress. The image dominating every newspaper and social media feed showed something completely unexpected. Daniel Ashford, the billionaire CEO who never showed emotion, kneeling on a cold sidewalk beside an injured elderly photographer. His custom-made suit jacket draped over the old man's shoulders. Emily holding the photographer's trembling hand. The headline simply read, "Power looks different when it chooses kindness." For the first time in years, the internet wasn't criticizing the Ashford family. Millions praised them instead. But praise has a way of attracting enemies. Monday morning, Ashford Global's boardroom was unusually tense. Several directors looked unhappy. One finally broke the silence. "Mr. Ashford." Daniel looked up. "Our stock rose 3% after the gala." "Good, but investors are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" The older executive folded his hands. "They think you're becoming emotional." Another director added, "They're worried your decisions are being influenced by your wife." Daniel calmly closed his laptop. "My decisions are influenced by facts." The room relaxed, then Daniel continued. "And the fact is, our employees have never been more productive. Our public reputation has never been stronger. Our customer satisfaction is at an all-time high." He stood. "So, if kindness is creating better results..." He looked around the room. "Why exactly are we afraid of it?" No one answered. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. Every proposal Daniel introduced was approved unanimously. Even those who disagreed privately couldn't argue with the numbers. At the mansion, Emily received an unexpected visitor, the elderly photographer from the gala. His name was George Harrison. He walked with a cane now, but his smile was brighter than ever. "I brought something." He carefully opened an old leather case. Inside were hundreds of photographs taken over 40 years. Presidents, athletes, farm stars, royal families. George gently picked one picture from the collection. "I've photographed some of the most famous people in the world." Then he placed another picture beside it. It was Daniel and Emily helping him on the sidewalk. "This," his voice shook, "is my favorite." Emily looked surprised. "Shh, there are much more important people in these albums." George smiled. "Important?" He slowly closed the book. "No, famous." He looked into Emily's eyes. "There's a difference." Emily framed the photograph. Instead of hanging it in the grand hallway, she placed it in the staff dining room. One of the housekeepers asked why. Emily smiled. "So everyone remembers what this house should stand for." The employees looked at the picture every day. It became more than a photograph. It became a reminder. Weeks passed. Daniel found himself changing in ways he never expected. He started eating breakfast instead of skipping it. He learned the names of employees' children. He remembered birthdays. He even surprised the night security team with hot coffee during a snowstorm. One guard nearly cried. "Sir, you've never come down here before." Daniel smiled slightly. "I know. I should have." One evening, Daniel entered the library carrying a small gift box. Emily looked up from her book. "What's this? I saw it and thought of you." She opened the box. Inside was a tiny silver bookmark shaped like a feather. Sybil elegant, nothing extravagant. Emily smiled warmly. I love it. Daniel frowned. That's all? She laughed. What did you expect? I don't know. Most people expect diamonds. Emily carefully placed the bookmark inside her favorite novel. My favorite gifts are the ones that tell me someone was paying attention. Daniel stood there quietly. He had spent years buying expensive presents for clients, partners, and family members. Yet, no one had ever appreciated something so small. That weekend, Emily convinced Daniel to visit her old neighborhood. The tiny brick house looked exactly the same. Children played basketball in the street. Neighbors waved from their porches. Emily's mother was waiting outside with fresh apple pie. Daniel hesitated before stepping onto the porch. He had attended dinners in royal palaces, private islands, luxury resorts. Yet somehow, this modest home made him nervous. Emily's mother hugged him tightly. No handshakes. We're family. Daniel froze for a second. No one outside his closest friend had hugged him in years. During dinner, everyone talked at once. Noah joked about college. Emily's mother teased Daniel for holding his fork too formally. Even the neighbors stopped by with homemade desserts. The house was noisy, crowded, far too small. And strangely, Daniel had never felt more comfortable. As they drove home that night, he stared out the window. What are you thinking? Emily asked. Daniel smiled to himself. I spent my whole life building the biggest house. He paused. I never realized. It's people who make a place feel big. Emily reached over and gently squeezed his hand. Neither of them pulled away. But while happiness quietly grew inside the Ashford marriage, someone else was watching. Across the city, inside a luxurious penthouse office, a man stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard Sterling, owner of Sterling International, Daniel's biggest business rival. His assistant placed a thick folder on the desk. Everything you requested. Richard opened it. Inside were photographs of Emily, hospital visits, community centers, volunteer work, family gatherings. He smiled slowly. So, this is the woman who changed Daniel Ashford. The assistant nodded. Should we continue investigating? Richard closed the folder. No. He walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. If Daniel Ashford has finally found something he truly loves, a cold smile spread across his face. Then we've finally found something he can lose. Far below, the city lights shimmered peacefully, unaware that a dangerous game had just begun. And, for the first time since signing their marriage contract, Daniel and Emily's greatest challenge would no longer come from the agreement that had brought them together. It would come from the people determined to tear them apart. 3 days later, Emily had no idea someone was following her. She left the Ashford mansion just after 8 in the morning with her usual canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder. No bodyguards, no luxury handbags, no expensive jewelry. She insisted on living as normally as possible. After all, she was only volunteering at the community center. Why would she need protection? Across the street, a black SUV started its engine. Inside, 2 men watched quietly. That's her. The boss was right. She always travels alone. The SUV remained several cars behind as Emily made her way through the city. She never noticed. At Ashford Global headquarters, Daniel couldn't shake a strange feeling. He had reviewed the same contract 3 times without reading a single sentence. His assistant knocked gently. Sir? Daniel looked up. Yes? Your 10 o'clock meeting is ready. Daniel stood, then suddenly stopped. Where's Emily today? The assistant checked his tablet. I believe she's volunteering at the community center. Daniel frowned. Did security accompany her? No, sir. Daniel's expression hardened. Call the security team. Tell them to stay close, but don't let her notice. The assistant looked surprised. Immediately, sir. Daniel didn't know why. He simply couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. At the community center, children ran toward Emily the moment she arrived. Miss Emily, she laughed as little Sophie wrapped her arms around her waist. You promised we'd paint today. I remember. For the next 2 hours, Emily forgot about everything else. She painted rainbows, helped children build toy houses, read stories, comforted a little boy who missed his father, to everyone there. She wasn't Mrs. Ashford. She was simply Emily, the woman who never forgot anyone's name. Outside, the black SUV remained parked across the street. One of the men lifted a camera. Click, click, dozens of photos. Every smile, every child, every routine, every weakness. That afternoon, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. Emily looked surprised. "What are you doing here? I finished work early." She raised an eyebrow. "You? I know, it's unusual." The children immediately surrounded him. "Mr. Ashford, come play soccer." Daniel looked helplessly at Emily. "I don't know how." Emily smiled mischievously. "They'll teach you." 5 minutes later, America's most intimidating CEO found himself standing in the middle of a playground, wearing an expensive suit, trying to kick a soccer ball. He completely missed. The children burst into laughter. Daniel laughed too. Apparently, "I'm out of practice." A little girl handed him the ball. "Try again." This time, he scored. The playground erupted into cheers. Emily clapped louder than anyone. For a brief moment, Daniel forgot about board meetings, stock prices, business rivals. The only thing that mattered was hearing children laugh. Across the street, the men inside the SUV exchanged glances. One picked up his phone. "Boss, he's here." A pause. "Yes, they're together." Another pause. "We'll wait." That evening, Daniel and Emily walked through a nearby park before heading home. The autumn leaves covered the pathways in shades of gold and red. Emily breathed deeply. "I love this season." Daniel glanced at her. "Why?" "Because trees teach us something." He smiled. "What?" "They're not afraid to let go of what they don't need." Daniel looked at the falling leaves. "You always find lessons in ordinary things." Emily laughed softly. "Maybe extraordinary things are hidden inside ordinary moments." Daniel looked at her for a long second. Before he could respond, his phone rang. His assistant's voice sounded urgent. "Sir, we've discovered something." Daniel stopped walking. "What is it?" "Someone has been investigating Mrs. Ashford." His expression immediately changed. "Who?" "We're still confirming, but they've hired private investigators, and they've been watching her for weeks." Daniel's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, from focus. "Bring every report to my office." Tonight, back at the mansion, the security chief spread photographs across Daniel's desk. Images of Emily entering hospitals, community centers, her mother's home, the grocery store, even the bakery she visited every Sunday. Daniel's jaw tightened. "They've been following her this entire time?" "Yes, sir. We believe the investigation was ordered by Sterling International." Richard Sterling, Daniel's biggest competitor. Daniel slowly closed the file. "Increase security." Quietly. "I don't want Emily frightened." The chief nodded. "Understood." Later that night, Emily found Daniel standing alone on the balcony overlooking the city. "You've been quiet all evening." Daniel turned. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated. "If someone tried to hurt me, what would you do?" Emily looked confused by the question. "I'd protect you, even if it put you in danger," she answered without hesitation. "Yes." Daniel stared at her. "Why?" Emily smiled gently. "Because you're my husband." She laughed softly. "I know this marriage started with a contract, but contracts don't decide how we treat people." Her words settled deep inside him. For months, Daniel had been trying to understand why Emily cared so much about everyone. Now he finally understood. Kindness wasn't something she chose when it was convenient. It was simply who she was, no matter the situation, no matter the cost. The next morning, Daniel canceled every meeting. His assistant was stunned. "Sir, you've never canceled an entire day." Daniel picked up his car keys. "I'm taking my wife somewhere." An hour later, Emily looked out the window as the city disappeared behind them. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise." After another 40 minutes, The car stopped beside a quiet lake surrounded by tall pine trees. There were no reporters, no executives, no security teams in sight. Only peaceful water reflecting the morning sky. Emily stepped out slowly. "It's beautiful." Daniel nodded. "My father used to bring me here." She looked surprised. "You've never talked about him." "I rarely do." For a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel admitted something he had never told anyone. "When I was 12, my father told me that love makes people weak." Emily listened quietly. "So, I spent almost 30 years believing him." She stepped closer. "And now?" Daniel looked into her eyes. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm beginning to think he was wrong." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. Before either of them could say another word, Daniel's phone vibrated. One message, one sentence. It came from an unknown number. "Enjoy your day together, Mr. Ashford. It may be your last peaceful one." Daniel's expression instantly darkened. Someone knew exactly where they were. Someone had been watching them. And this time, the threat was no longer hidden. Daniel read the message twice. His face remained calm. Inside, every instinct told him the threat was real. Emily noticed the change immediately. "What happened?" Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Nothing." She gently took his hand. "Daniel, you don't have to protect me from the truth." He looked into her eyes and sighed. "Someone knows we're here." Emily's smile faded. "Richard? I don't know, but I intend to find out." Without another word, Daniel called his security team. Within minutes, several vehicles quietly surrounded the area. The drive back to the city was silent, not because they were afraid, because they both knew life had just changed. The following morning, Ashford Global Headquarters became the center of an unexpected crisis. Daniel's cybersecurity team entered his office carrying several laptops. "We traced the anonymous message." Daniel looked up. "Who sent it?" The lead investigator placed a folder on the desk. It originated from a phone purchased using a fake identity. Daniel frowned. "So we have nothing." "Not exactly." The investigator smiled slightly. "We followed the payments. They lead directly to Sterling International." Daniel closed the folder. "Prepare everything. We're going to finish this legally." Richard Sterling believed Daniel would react with anger. He expected lawsuits, public accusations, a corporate war. Instead, 2 weeks later, federal investigators arrived at Sterling International's headquarters with search warrants. Years of illegal surveillance, corporate espionage, bribery, and financial fraud came to light. Several executives immediately resigned. Investors fled. Richard watched helplessly as the empire he had spent decades building collapsed in a single afternoon. When reporters asked Daniel for a comment outside the courthouse, microphones crowded around him. "Mr. Ashford, did you destroy your biggest rival?" Daniel answered calmly. "I didn't destroy anyone. People eventually face the consequences of their own choices." Then he walked away. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least, to a new kind of normal. The Ashford mansion was no longer quiet. Every Friday evening, the staff gathered for dinner together. Birthdays were celebrated. Children of employees visited during holidays. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once been filled only with silence. Visitors often asked what had changed. The employees always gave the same answer: Mrs. Ashford. One evening, Emily opened the drawer beside her bed. Inside lay the marriage contract. Only 1 month remained before it expired. She stared at the final page, the signatures, the expiration date, the promise that everything would end. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel entered. He noticed the contract in her hands. "So, the year's almost over." Emily nodded. "It is." Neither of them spoke. For several moments, only silence filled the room. Finally, Emily smiled sadly. "I should probably start packing soon." Daniel looked at her as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. "Packing? Our agreement ends next month." She tried to smile. "You've kept every promise. My family's safe. My mom is healthy. Noah graduated. I'll always be grateful. Daniel slowly walked toward her. What if? He stopped. What if I don't want the agreement to end? Emily's heart began to race. She searched his face. What do you mean? Daniel picked up the contract. For years, contracts had controlled every important decision in his life. Today, this one felt meaningless. He looked into Emily's eyes. When I asked you to marry me, I believed love was a distraction. I believed people only cared about money. I believed kindness was weakness. He smiled softly. You proved me wrong. He tore the contract in half, then into 4 pieces, then again. Tiny pieces of paper drifted onto the floor like snow. There, Emily could barely breathe. The contract is gone, but my feelings aren't. For the first time since they met. Daniel reached for her hands, not because cameras were watching, not because the agreement required it, but because his heart did. I don't want 1 more month. I want every year. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You mean? Daniel smiled. I'm asking you to marry me, for real this time. Emily laughed through her tears. You know, that's the strangest proposal anyone has ever given. I've never been very good at romance. She smiled. I noticed. Daniel pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside wasn't the biggest diamond in the world. It wasn't flashy. It was a simple ring with a tiny sapphire surrounded by delicate diamonds. I bought this months ago. I kept waiting for the right moment. Emily looked at him in surprise. You planned this? I hoped for it. Daniel took a deep breath. Emily Carter, will you marry me again? This time without contracts, without deadlines, without conditions. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. Then she whispered the only word he wanted to hear. Yes. 6 months later, the Ashford mansion hosted another wedding. This time, there were no reporters inside, no business contracts, no legal negotiations. The guests were the people who had become family, the gardeners, the chefs, the housekeepers, the security guards, the children from the community center. George, the photographer, proudly stood behind his camera. Emily's mother walked her down the aisle. Noah stood beside Daniel as his best man. When the ceremony ended, everyone applauded as George captured the moment. He smiled while looking through his camera lens. This one, he whispered to himself, will be my favorite forever. Daniel kissed Emily gently as the guests cheered. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who once believed love was a weakness understood the greatest truth he had ever learned. The richest man in the room wasn't the one with the most money. It was the one who had someone to love, and someone who loved him back. Like, subscribe, and support my channel. I really need your support. If you enjoy my video, please share it and leave your feedback in the comments.